contrast that with someone who was so unlucky as to retire in the year 2000, the tippy top of the tech bubble, when the valuations were 6 times as measured by the Shiller PE ratio, 6 times as expensive as they were in 82. And the result of that is we had the tech bubble collapse and then the housing bubble collapse here in 2008. And you can see that in the same scenario, starting with $1 million, the same withdrawal scenario actually runs out of money by 1996, and the nest egg consistently drops in value. And you can see the key difference here is the rate of return. Hello, everybody. This is John Llodra. I'm a co-founder and partner here at New Harbor Financial Group. Thank you for being with me here today. We put these weekly video series out for our clients and viewers to bring insight and data, all for the purpose of helping our clients live stress-free and secure financial futures as best as they're able to. Every one of our clients, and indeed every viewer here, is unique, has their own story, their own goals and wishes. But one common goal that many folks have is the idea of retiring someday. Many people have to work to support themselves over their lifetime, and hopefully at someday they can enjoy the fruits of their labor and retire. And maybe even retire early if the circumstances allow. So of course, to be able to judge that decision, it takes some analysis. We certainly don't advise folks to retire blindly without any kind of sanity check as to whether they can provide for their needs. So it simply is the analogy I would use is that when you retire, you've got to have resources to create your own paycheck that is no longer coming in from your employer. And I think a good imagery is that of a bucket of water. During your working lifetime, that bucket is watertight and has a hose that hopefully is filling that bucket very steadily and swiftly over your working time. But when you enter retirement, the spigot at the bottom of that bucket gets turned on, and suddenly the level of the water is pressured and will almost certainly for most people get drained down to some degree during their retirement period. That's really what retirement savings are for, not to sit there and do nothing, but to be able to create that paycheck that one needs after their retirement. So inflows, of course, are things like guaranteed sources of income, Social Security, pensions, any passive real estate income, for example. Of course, if you have saved and created retirement accounts or investment accounts, the returns on those or losses, as the case might be, can affect that rate of inflow. And then the outflows, of course, are things like everyday living expenses, but also discretionary stuff. The things you want to do, the things you've put off to do someday during retirement. That, for many people, for example, can include travel. But you also have to think about the unexpected expenses. And as we age, and certainly as we get further into retirement, things like health events become key unexpected events that we need to account for and plan for, because these can be very expensive. Of course, everybody knows that healthcare expenses have gone through the roof, and unfortunately, it's something that we can't plan necessarily for. We can estimate, but we never know if and when those events will happen. So I'd like to start with just guaranteed sources of income. Most folks who have worked during their lifetime will be eligible for Social Security benefits. There are exceptions to that, of course. For example, many teachers in some states pay into a teacher's retirement system instead of Social Security, but most workers will be eligible for Social Security. Even those that haven't worked, for example, say there's a stay-at-home spouse and that spouse hasn't worked to create their own Social Security record, spouses are eligible for spousal benefits, and that's simply the higher of their own Social Security benefit or 50% of their spouse's benefit. And even divorced spouses are eligible. So what I would encourage folks to do is get an estimate of their own Social Security benefits, and one can do so by going to the Social Security website and establishing an account. And that's, I've shined up on my screen here, the Social Security web page. So you can see here, you can create an account and sign in. And again, one of the key things here is you can get an illustration of estimated future benefits. So I highly recommend folks, especially those that are starting to think about when can I retire, go ahead and establish that account and get an estimate of your benefits. I'm going to leave unspoken right now the question of the safety of those benefits. There's been oftentimes talked about the insufficiency of the Social Security Trust Fund. That's a whole nother ball of wax that we'll cover in a separate thing, but go ahead and do that. Same with your if you have a pension plan at work. Many defined benefit pension plans had been phased out over the last several decades, but there still are plenty of employers that provide a defined benefit pension plan for their employees. And both with Social Security and pensions, there is a decision as to when to turn these things on. So there's a trade-off. Starting younger oftentimes means a lower benefit. Deferring to later means a higher benefit, but you got to live longer to justify waiting that long to get that benefit. And here's where a good financial advisor can be helpful to help you do an empirical analysis, a financial analysis of those decisions to start sooner or later and look at the trade-offs. So for example, with a corporate pension, one can oftentimes choose a lump sum or a guaranteed pension for life. And you can do things like internal rate of return analysis to determine what is the more compelling choice there. And even, for example, if you choose a pension payout over a life, there's oftentimes a decision to set that over your own life or to provide for a survivor's benefit, for example, for your spouse. So there's definitely some financial analysis that is relevant and appropriate to do. And again, a good financial advisor can do that. We do that all the time with our clients. When we think about these guaranteed sources of income and one's needs, usually most folks have spending needs, budgets, living expenses, and discretionary expenses that exceed those guaranteed sources of income. So they need to turn to their savings, their assets, to provide for that missing paycheck. And here's where the notion of when can I retire, we think it's appropriate to think about it in terms of how much you can safely withdraw from your nest egg without a high likelihood of running out of money. And there are a lot of ways to kind of get to that question. There are some, we think, quite useful rules of thumb that, as with any rules of thumb, there are plenty of caveats, but there are also more detailed analysis using, very powerful financial planning software and tools. We do all this for our clients, of course, and any of our clients or viewers here that feel it's time to kind of take a look at this, we're very happy to do that and walk through the important facets of the analysis. But again, getting back to a safe withdrawal rate, it's really the idea of how much can I withdraw from my savings and have a very low likelihood of running out of money, very low likelihood of that bucket of water being depleted by taking too much out of the spigot too quickly. It's obviously a function of how long is one going to live, what age one wants to start withdrawing. Certainly, if you retire early, there's likely going to be more years you're going to have to withdraw. If you work late, for folks who really just love to work and maybe don't want to retire till they're 80, given life expectancies, their withdrawal period, the period they have to create their own paycheck, is going to be shorter. There are some rules of thumb, and Morningstar did a neat analysis that I'm going to share here just to kind of give you a glimpse at some of the trade-offs here. So as I said, this is an analysis done by Morningstar. This is data as of September 30th. And what this basically a table shows is the starting safe withdrawal rate in percent for a 30-year assumed period to achieve a 90% success rate by asset allocation. What these numbers are is the percent withdrawal rate of one's nest egg. So for example, this number says if you have 100% in stocks and you need 10 years of withdrawals, you can take out about 8.3% per year and have a 90% chance of success. Of course, if you need to plan for 40 years of withdrawals, the safe withdrawal rate is much lower, only 2.9% in that scenario of 100% stock weighting. If you notice, for example, let's assume a 30-year period, a 30-year horizon that one wants to plan to have resources to be sufficient. What you notice here is as you go from 100 to 0% stock weighting, you'll notice there's an inflection point of the safe withdrawal rate, meaning that right around here, you can see the safe withdrawal rate is about 4% of, so if you have $100,000 nest egg, it means you can take about $4,000 per year and adjust over time for inflation. And you notice here that even at a higher stock weighting, it's only 3.3%. And at a lower stock weighting, it's only 3.6. So there is a sweet spot, depending on one's age and horizon, where a mix of stocks and bonds typically, and I'll get onto that later because we think there's far more complex decisions and prudent decisions to make other than just being in traditional stocks and bonds. But the point being is that taking more risk, more stock exposure isn't necessarily a good thing. It actually can be a risk when you're withdrawing. And in fact, that's a good segue into the next chart here, which basically speaks to the key risk of what we call sequence of returns risk. What this analysis shows is the impact of retiring at a time when the stock market is really richly valued, even overvalued. And I've contrasted a couple of scenarios here. One is looking at a period that can objectively be categorized as cheap. The year 1982, after the really difficult decade of the 70s, stocks were tremendously undervalued in 1982. And as a result of that, the returns from the future there over the next 20 years were actually quite compelling, because all else being equal, low valuations usually translates to high subsequent returns. And you can see here, this shows a kind of a hypothetical example of withdrawing 5% of, starting with a $1 million nest egg right here, and withdrawing 5% of that, 50 grand, adjusted upward for inflation. In this case, we made an inflation assumption of 2.5%. And you see under the simple example that not only does the nest egg provide for this growing inflation-adjusted income stream, but the ending value continues to grow. Contrast that with someone who was so unlucky as to retire in the year 2000, the tippy top of the tech bubble, when the valuations were 6 times as measured by the PE ratio, Shiller PE ratio, 6 times as expensive as they were in 82. And the result of that is we had the tech bubble collapse, and then the housing bubble collapse here in 2008. And you can see that in the same scenario, starting with $1 million, the same withdrawal scenario actually runs out of money by 1996. I guess this is 15 years here. And the nest egg consistently drops in value. And you can see the key difference here is the rate of return. So this is a really important factor. And I'll use that to kind of just emphasize the economics of loss here. Really important when you retire to be careful of valuations. And one of the most important things during retirement, or as you approach retirement, is protecting the downside. During your young working years, and theoretically, you have time runway to make up for big losses. When you're retired, you don't have that luxury. Protecting the downside becomes every bit as important as growing your assets, even more so. When you are entering retirement, it's really important to kind of look long term, but also be very mindful of what is an appropriate asset allocation for today. I would like to make reference to even Vanguard, which is most folks are familiar with Vanguard, pioneer of index investing and passive buying, hold investing. Even Vanguard put out a paper in the fall of 2023 advising that, especially during a retirement period where you want to have a guaranteed source of income from your savings, it's really important to be valuation aware and adjust one's asset allocation to be aware of valuations. In other words, when stocks are high valued, for example, overvalued even, it makes sense to shift to a lower stock allocation, regardless of one's age. The other key factor in retirement is inflation, because we know cost of living goes up over time, and sometimes more quickly than other times. And some categories of expenses are rising even faster, for example, healthcare. So it's really important to position to counteract the impacts of inflation. So this is during the 1970s when inflation was a real problem. And the thing I'd like to point out here, this shows the nominal and the inflation adjusted real returns for different types of assets. And you see here the S&P 500, let's call this the stock market, and treasury bonds both lost value in inflation adjusted terms during the 70s. And ironically, that's what most people have their assets in. Most mainstream investment advisors or self-directed investors will have most of their money in some just mix of stocks and bonds. And you can see in the 70s anyways, it was really important to have other things like commodities. We're big proponents of real assets and commodities and gold and things like that. So it's really important to kind of be very mindful of how one is invested during their retirement period. There are all kinds of specialized strategies that one should consider. So for example, many folks have saved in pre-tax, tax-deferred 401ks or IRAs. one kind of key thing during retirement planning is to think about ways that you can smartly and with savvy kind of arbitrage different tax situations. Because as most folks know, when you start to withdraw from retirement accounts, you're going to be paying income taxes on those monies. You have to report those distributions. You got a tax deduction up front, and the money grew tax deferred, but the IRS gets their bill back when you start to withdraw. So there are ways that you can smartly change withdrawal strategies to hopefully minimize taxes. And let me just give you an example. So for example, it can be very smart to do what's called a Roth IRA conversion. Take a traditional IRA and electively distribute money from that, even if you don't need it, and even if you're not forced to through required minimum distributions, and use that distribution to fund a Roth IRA, a so-called Roth conversion. You're going to pay taxes at that time. The monies that are in the Roth IRA, they can grow tax-free for forever, as long as your life. It oftentimes is smart to do that in cognizance of your tax brackets. So here I have the 2024 tax brackets. So if we focus on this column here for married individuals filing jointly, you can see there's a 10% federal tax rate, a 12%, and then a big jump to 22%. So you can see here that married filing jointly can report up to $94,300 of taxable income and still be in a 12% tax bracket. So let's say this married couple retires and their reported income goes to zero. Well, they could convert up to $94,300 of taxable income in their IRA into a Roth and still be in a 12% tax bracket, which may be preferential to withdrawals later on at a higher tax bracket. And of course, we don't know what the future tax rates are likely to be. We think they're likely to be higher than they are today here in 2024 as I'm creating this video, in part because of the massive budget deficits that we're running here as a country. So these are the kinds of things that we can help clients and viewers evaluate, tax strategies, things like that. Getting back to the question, can I retire, really comes down to an analysis of one's needs and resources to meet those needs. And for many, an analysis like this may say, well, if you need $100,000 a year and you only have resources that can fund $80,000 a year, well, the takeaway there is, unless you reduce your living expense needs, it's likely not a wise decision to retire and continue working, continue saving, building up your nest egg so that you can get to that safe zone. By the same token, there may be folks out there that, because they haven't gone through this exercise and they're stressed out about this, perhaps are working longer than they need to. An analysis like this might show that one's nest egg is plenty sufficient for any range of scenarios that we can reasonably conceive of. And that may allow that family, that household, to breathe a deep sigh of relief because, hey, I'm stressing out and I can now retire just because I've done the analysis to show that I have the sufficient resources to do that. So I hope this was useful and informative. Obviously, there's a whole lot of analysis that goes into this, and a good financial advisor can be helpful for that. Our clients should know, and many of them do know because we've done this work for them, that we have the tools and the perspective to help them walk through these kinds of questions. And for those viewers that don't know us, we invite you to reach out to us. Please, we're happy with no obligation to have a consultation and see if there's some value we can provide you in helping wrestle with these very important questions. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I do invite folks to subscribe and like this video. Please share it with folks that you think might benefit from that. And if you do want to reach out to us, in our description below this video, you'll see a link to our website and whatnot. But thank you all for watching. And for those that are in retirement, I wish smooth sailing and of course, also for folks that are plotting their path towards retirement. Thanks again for watching, and until next time, have a great day.